The Samsung Q950A is an 11.1.4 channel soundbar, the 0.1 being the subwoofer and the 0.4 due to its upward firing drivers, and yes, that also includes rear speakers. Now, the soundbar in the UK can be found for roughly £900 on box.co.uk, and they were actually really kind enough to provide me this sample. In the US, it can be found for roughly $1,500. Now, I feel that this review is quite timely because the Samsung Q990B has also been announced and is available, although it comes in at a whopping £1,600 from Samsung and offers near identical specifications to the Q950A. Now, indeed, the soundbar does come with some rear speakers and a pretty chunky subwoofer. Now, I do think they're all pretty stylish, so you'll want to make sure that you have the right sort of space for it, and of course that the rear drivers are positioned appropriately, let's say near your sofa. Now, it is worth bearing in mind that the soundbar unit itself is also pretty long, so you'll want to ensure that you have got a right sort of setup. You can fit it on a cabinet like I have, and you can also wall mount it. What I will say is, despite the number of drivers that it houses, it's actually pretty sleek and I think will fit on most sorts of TV setups. Now, in order to interact with the soundbar, you've got some physical buttons that are found at the top of it, which makes it quite handy if you, for example, lose your remote control. But here, I do not like the fact that Samsung have included an LCD LED display at the top of the soundbar, and therefore means when you're adjusting certain settings, you have actually no idea unless if you were to peer up and therefore adjust those settings. You do have a small little LED indicator that's positioned towards the front of the soundbar, but alas, it's nowhere near as detailed as one might expect, and as a result, if you are going to be flicking through different inputs or adjusting the different sort of modes, then it might make it a little bit more cumbersome to interact with it. Now, of course, for you to adjust your settings on the fly and from afar, you do have a bundled remote, and it's very sleek and stylish, and it hasn't changed from previous Samsung iterations, and I've got no complaints whatsoever in this department. So moving on to the app, if you were to tap on this, you can switch quickly between inputs, which I find quite handy. You can adjust the volume on the fly, and then you've got the sound modes, whereby you've got the adaptive, game, surround, and standard modes to choose. Elsewhere, you do have the equalizer, whereby in my case, I've added 1 notch to the bass and 2 notches to the treble EQ. Of course, this is very subjective and depends on your room's acoustics, and likewise with the woofer controls. In my case, I've taken 3 notches off it. You might want to add it if you've got, let's say, a bigger room. As for the auto EQ, it will auto EQ as the name suggests. It takes 1 or 2 minutes to do that, and in my case, I did actually find it to have a slight better sort of sound, although that said, I still did adjust the individual channels manually. Now, we'll touch upon that very shortly, because here in the advanced sound settings, you can enable the voice, bass enhancements, and night mode, but surprisingly, via the remote control, you will not have the bass enhancement nor night modes to select, and as such, you'll have to resort to the app, which does seem a little bit weird because in terms of the channel modes, they are not present in terms of the device settings, and as such means that you're going to have to resort to using the remote and resorting to looking at that small LCD LED display found at the top of the soundbar. Nevertheless, through here, you can enable the audio feedback, you can adjust the lip sync delay, go into Bluetooth pairing mode, and check your network status. Elsewhere, it does have Amazon Alexa built in, so you can adjust the settings here and your Spotify Connect settings, and also check for a firmware update. Now, in order to connect up to the app, of course, the soundbar must support Wi-Fi, and it does. And here you do also have Amazon Alexa support, whereby it's actually baked into the soundbar and therefore allows you to perform certain commands over just your voice. But of course, if you don't like this, then you'll just not want to set up the Alexa integration, and also you might want to disable the mics permanently by pressing the physical button found at the top of the soundbar unit. You do have Spotify Connect, which is quite handy, and you do also have Bluetooth, whereby the lowest quality SBC codec is supported only. So you'll probably just want to do this as a last resort, or for example, if you're running a party and you just want someone to play around with the music over Bluetooth. Now, as for that, it is worth bearing in mind here that the soundbar does support Apple AirPlay 2, which is great, but it's a shame not to see Google Chromecast support. Given Samsung is in the Android world rather than the Apple iOS world, I do find it somewhat baffling. Now, if you do want to achieve the best sort of sound quality, you want to connect connect over via wired connection, and here you've got a singular optical input, 2 HDMI inputs, which is useful for your, let's say, 4K Blu-ray player in terms of pass-through, and here the soundbar does support 4K HDR10 as well, which is all very handy. For example, if you have Dolby Atmos content that you want to play it back by connecting directly to the soundbar unit rather than your television, which for example might not support Dolby Atmos or DTS:X. And then you do also have a HDMI output whereby the ARC and eARC standards are supported, the latter being quite handy for those people who have modern televisions and you want uncompressed Dolby Atmos data to be fed through it. Now I should point out that the rear speakers and the subwoofer are all wireless. They connect pretty much instantaneously, had no problems in terms of connectivity and or in terms of any sort of delay. So with all of that in mind, let's get onto a demo. And first off, we'll be playing back a song. It's by Priya J, it's titled Falling. And then we'll be also going on to a piece to camera whereby I'll be presenting the Hyundai Kona Electric on Totally EV. Do check out the annotations down below to understand which mode it's running on, and therefore it'll give you an indication and potentially a little taster as to how the soundbar performs.
Young, you should hide, then learn how to fly. It's the only way you know how to play this game. To success, I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always sing, and now I'm my way back to falling from so high, falling from so high. The thing is, my imagination is constantly racing 1,000 miles ahead. I'm living in my own mind.
Now, the same could be said about the 2021 Kona Electric, which starts from roughly £29,000 in the UK, and if you go for the larger 64 kilowatt hour battery pack, it can be found for roughly £35,000. Now indeed, the Kona Electric is available in two battery pack models, a 39 and 64 kilowatt hour sizes, and here what you'll find is that the former gets around 180 miles while the latter gets 300 miles. Now with the audio demo out of the way, which I appreciate is not always ideal, here I'm just going to talk about the specifications of the soundbar before getting to my subjective opinion. Here you do have an 11.1.4 channel configuration and you've got a whopping 22 drivers. You've got full range upward, firing and sideward drivers, and that also includes tweeters. The same could be said about the rear speakers as well, and the subwoofer unit is pretty chunky. Elsewhere, it is worth bearing in mind that in terms of metadata support, it's got Dolby Digital, DTS:X and Dolby Atmos among the few other metadatas that are out there as well. Now better still, Samsung does offer a few of its proprietary technology. So if you have a modern Samsung television, you can benefit from Q-Symphony, which effectively benefits from using the built-in speakers of the television and then synchronizes it with the soundbar and of course the rear speakers and the subwoofer, and provides a little bit more of a room-filling sound. And then you've also got the SpaceFit Plus technology, which therefore gives you an EQ or something that's a little bit more dynamic to your own room's acoustics. However, if you're like myself and you don't have a modern Samsung television, or of course if you have a non-Samsung branded television, then here you'll be only limited to the auto EQ, which here uses the subwoofer to produce low-end tones and therefore equalizes the sub-bass tones for your room's acoustics. So with all of that in mind, how does it actually sound? Well, let's break it down in terms of the individual frequency range. First off, in terms of the sub-bass tones, I think here it's absolutely spectacular. It dives down into the lower echelons of the bass tones, and while it won't compete with larger subwoofer units out there from, let's say, dedicated hi-fi equipment and or for example from the creative SXFI Carrier, it is still up there with some of the best low-end tones that you can be able to reproduce, be it in terms of the sub-bass or the mid-bass tones, and if you are listening to regular music or watching dynamic movies. Now as for the mid-bass, here I feel that it's really punchy and tight and precise, and it doesn't overcrowd the mid-range either. Of course, you can EQ this to your heart's content, and I felt that adding a couple of notches to the bass EQ actually resulted in a far superior experience and therefore made me a little bit more excited when I was listening back to my music. Now, as for the mids, they are slightly pushed back, specifically if you compare it to the likes of the Creative SXFI Carrier, which I would say is really class leading in terms of the mid-range department. But nonetheless, I think here you're going to be left excited listening to male or female vocals, or listening to a commentary that has a lot of sound going around it. Here you'll feel that you're still quite engaged, and the mids are still at the forefront of the overall sound presentation of the Q950A. Now, other than that, you do have the highs, and here I feel that they extend really well and they provide a nice sort of zing at the top end. This keeps your toes tapping to your favorite tracks and keeps you engaged when you're listening back to movies as well. Frankly, I've got no complaints over here, and it's no surprise because it does have dedicated tweeters to aid with that experience. Now, with all of that said, let's get onto this Soundstage. And here what I'm going to be doing is playing back a demo from Transformers Age of Extinction. I'll be cycling through Dolby Atmos, and whereby the Blu-ray player is connected directly to the soundbar, then going into Dolby Digital and then also PCM. Check out the annotations down below to understand which mode it's actually running on, and hopefully you'll be able to pick out the slight sort of nuances, specifically in comparison to Dolby Digital and Dolby Atmos.
I don't think we're going to get that money. Doesn't seem like it. You know it. What do you mean, what thing? What we're about to do is going to be kind of scary. Take out your guns and shoot them. Take out your guns and shoot them. Take out your guns and shoot them. Grab my stick, grab my stick. What? She's got the best hands in the business. Ready, Tess?
Now, I appreciate the differences might be a little bit hard to pick out, but I will say that when you're sat in person, specifically with the rear drivers sat next to you, and that's one of the selling points of why you'd get the 950A over, for example, the 900A, the overall cinematic experience is really, really good. The little sounds and sort of nuances that come from the rear, like say, for example, gunshots, it's just absolutely engaging, really provides a true cinematic experience. Add the fact that you've got that extra metadata with Dolby Atmos, or for example, if you have DTS:X as well, then you're going to really have that sort of height information provided by the soundbar, the subwoofer, and of course the rear drivers. Now here, of course, it does bring me on to Dolby Atmos, and it is absolutely phenomenal, at least if you can benefit from it. In my case, I've got a 4K Blu-ray player directly connected up to the soundbar, and it provides a real engaging experience. Now, even if you don't have any Dolby Atmos content and you're going through the different modes, I would suggest the adaptive sound mode, whereby it does adapt to what is shown on the screen. And in this respect, I felt quite engaged, be it if I was watching movies such as Transformers, or for example, I was listening to music, or even watching back a piece to commentary. So for example, when I was talking about the Hyundai Kona Electric on Totally EV, here the adaptive sound really does do a good job and still provides you a surround sound experience. So you can still benefit with those rear drivers, even if you don't have the highest metadata, in other words, Dolby Atmos or DTS:X. Now, in terms of the overall soundstage here that Samsung has provided, it's absolutely phenomenal. If it isn't obvious already, the overall instrument separation to the overall width and depth, and that's really thanks to the 22 drivers that you've got available, and therefore playing different sorts of tones and tracks all at once provides a real engaging experience. Frankly, if you want the best cinematic experience that you can get in a soundbar unit, then in this respect, I think the Samsung Q950A is absolutely spectacular and definitely one-ups its sibling, the Q900A, due to the addition of the rear drivers. So with all of that in mind, would I recommend the Q950A? Well, currently and at the time of filming, it can be found for roughly £900 on box.co.uk, and again, shout out for them for actually providing the soundbar for review. And at this price point, it's really hard to have any sort of flaws. It's not a £1,600 device like the Q990B, or indeed in terms of its initial release price, and therefore at the time of filming I just think most people will be left absolutely jaw-dropped if they're to splash out this sort of money. I do appreciate it's quite a lot of money to spend, but if you want a true cinematic experience and you don't want the faff of a receiver and wires tangling around from left and right and a true hi-fi setup, then I think this is as close as you're going to get, and for a somewhat affordable or budget price. As such, it actually gets my Best Buy award. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the Q950A down in the comment section below, and of course, what you think of the other soundbars that are available in the market at the moment. Now, if you've liked this independent detail review and want to see more from myself on the channel, definitely do drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, all of which are greatly appreciated and does help the channel grow. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.